Okay, we are live on YouTube. I'm coming to you from an Airbnb, so this is a little different for me. Anyway, so welcome. We're here to do 15 minutes of chair yoga. You're welcome to be here as much or as little as you like. So you might find a place to sit. So maybe finding a chair that has a little bit of a harder bottom, um, perhaps lengthening your spine. And if you're lengthening your spine, you might notice your breath. So you might notice your breath. And if you're noticing your breath, I noticed I was holding my breath. So if you notice that, one option is to invite the breath in. So that's one option. Another option might be to notice the pacing of your breath. Like, are your inhales and exhales similar in length? Or are they different? And maybe moving, you might turn your head to one side. So maybe turning your head to one side, maybe turning it part of the way, or you could turn it as far as you can. You have a choice. And if your head is turned to the side, you might bring it back to center and perhaps switching sides. So you could turn your head the other way, maybe turning it part of the way, or you could turn it as far as you can. You're in charge of how far to turn your head. And if your head is turned, you might bring it back to center and maybe tilting your head to one side. So you might be tilting your head to one side, so maybe your ear moves in the direction of your shoulder. And if you're tilting your head to one side, you might notice some sensation in the side of your neck, maybe somewhere else, or maybe not at all. If your head is tilted to the side, you could bring it back to center and maybe switching sides. So you might tilt your head the other way. So you might have your head tilted to one side. And maybe noticing the breath. So you might be noticing your breath. If your head is tilted to one side, you might bring it back to center and maybe inhaling, you might bring your arms up overhead. So you might bring your arms towards the sky. And maybe as you exhale, you might fold. So one option might be to fold, placing your forearms on your thighs. Another option could be to fold so that your hands touch the floor. So you have a choice. Maybe noticing the breath. And if you'd like, you might make your way back up to standing. So you might return to seated, maybe moving your shoulders. So you could roll your shoulders, maybe rolling them forward, or you could roll them back. So you might be moving your shoulders. And maybe bringing your shoulders back to center and perhaps reaching one arm up to the sky. So you might reach one arm up to the sky and maybe staying here. Another option could be to lean to the side. So you might be leaning to one side, or you might be upright with your arm to the sky. You have a choice. You're welcome to notice your breath. Maybe noticing movement in your belly or chest as you breathe. If you're leaning to the side, you might lift back up to center. And if your arm is lifted, you're welcome to lower it and perhaps switching sides. So maybe reaching your Other arm up to the sky, so you might have one arm lifted, and you could stay here, leaning to the side. So you might be leaning to the other side, maybe noticing your breath. And if you're leaning to the side, you're welcome to lift back up to center. And if your arm is lifted, you might lower your arm. And perhaps placing your hands on your legs, maybe as you're inhaling, you might move your belly forward, perhaps lifting your chest and your chin. And maybe as you exhale, you might round your spine, maybe lowering your chin to your chest. And maybe doing that a few times. So perhaps inhaling, you might move your belly forward, maybe lifting your chest and chin. And perhaps as you exhale, you might round your spine, perhaps lowering your chin to your chest. You're welcome to continue to do this a couple more times. Maybe noticing your breath. Maybe the next time you're inhaling, you might return to seated. So you might be seated with your spine upright. And if you're seated with your spine upright, one option might be to lean back slightly. So you might lean back. So maybe your back is off of the chair. So you might be leaning back, maybe noticing your abdominals engage. You might notice it's somewhere else. Or maybe not at all. And perhaps lifting back up if you were leaning back. And maybe pausing, you might notice your breath. Maybe noticing movement in your belly or chest as you breathe. And perhaps turning to the right. So you might turn your torso to the right, maybe placing your left hand on the outer edge of your right leg. So you could be turning your torso to the right, maybe noticing the breath. And if you're turning to the side, you might return back to center and perhaps switching sides. So maybe turning the other way. So you might be turning to one side, maybe turning to the left, perhaps placing your right hand on your left leg. Maybe noticing sensation in your back or the back of your shoulders or neck, or maybe somewhere else. And if you're turning to the side, you might return back to center and perhaps extending one leg out in front of you on the floor. So you might straighten one leg, maybe, or move your leg towards straight is another option. You might place your heel on the floor or your whole foot on the floor. And one option might be to lengthen your spine to the sky. Another option could be to fold forward. So you might hinge at your hips, maybe placing your hands or forearms on your thighs, or maybe your hands on the floor. You have a choice. Maybe noticing the breath. And if you're folded forward, you might lift back up to center and perhaps switching sides. So you might extend your other leg out in front of you, perhaps straightening your leg, or there might be a bend in it. And you could keep your spine lifted, Or if you like, you're welcome to fold forward, maybe placing your hands on the floor or your hands or forearms on your thigh. You have a choice. Maybe noticing the breath. And if you're folded forward, you might lift back up to center and maybe crossing your right leg over your left. So you could cross your right ankle over your left thigh, maybe opening your knee to the side. So you might have one knee to the side, maybe in this figure four shape. And one option might be to keep your spine lifted, or another option could be to fold forward. You have a choice. Maybe noticing the breath. And if your leg is crossed over, you might release. If you're folded forward, you might come back up and then release. And perhaps switching sides. So you might cross your left leg over your right. So maybe your left ankle is over your right thigh. Perhaps opening your knee to the side. Maybe noticing your breath. You might notice movement as you breathe, maybe in your belly or chest or throat. And if one leg is crossed over the other, you might release. And perhaps extending one leg straight out in front of you, but maybe lifting your heel off the floor. So you could have one leg lifted in front of you, maybe noticing some sensation in the top of your thigh, or maybe noticing it somewhere else, or maybe not at all. And perhaps releasing. You're welcome to switch sides. So maybe extending your other leg out in front of you. You could lift your foot off the floor. So you might notice some sensation in the top front of your leg that's extended. Maybe noticing the breath. And perhaps releasing. Maybe as you're inhaling, you might reach your arms up overhead. And maybe as you're exhaling, you might bring your hands through heart center down by your sides. And you're welcome to do that again. Maybe as you're inhaling, you might reach your arms up overhead. Perhaps as you exhale, you might bring your hands through heart center and down by your sides. Maybe inhaling, you might bring your arms up one more time. And perhaps as you exhale, you might bring your hands down by your sides. And you're welcome to find a way to rest. So you might rest leaning back in your chair or on the floor. You might rest upright. And some people, when they rest, like to have some movement. So one option might be to run the pads of your fingers over the pads of your thumbs. Another option might be to notice your breath. And I'll quiet my voice as we rest for about 30 seconds. And you're welcome to notice the breath. And if you've been resting, you're welcome to make some movement in your fingers and toes. You might stay resting where you are longer, or you might return to seated if you're not already there. It's been my pleasure to guide your practice today. Peace. All right. Thanks for being here, Neil and Nayali. It's good to see you both. I